They say family is everything. But what happens when everything you believed about your family turns out to be built on lies, deception, and blood money? I thought I knew my parents. I thought I understood their success, their wealth, their pristine reputation in our Phoenix community. I was wrong about everything. The day they dragged me into court, confident they would destroy me, I walked in with a single document that would change our lives forever. That piece of paper didn't just expose the truth. It brought federal agents crashing through their door within hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jake Martinez, and at 29, I thought I had figured out life's cruel lessons. Working as a paramedic in Phoenix's busiest districts, I had seen humanity at its worst, and occasionally at its best. The desert heat, the endless emergency calls, the weight of holding someone's life in your hands, it all seemed manageable compared to what was waiting for me at home. I lived modestly in a cramped Tempe apartment, my paramedic salary barely covering rent and student loans from my medical training. Meanwhile, my family lived like royalty in their sprawling Scottsdale mansion, complete with infinity pools, marble floors, and gates that cost more than most people's cars. The contrast never bothered me much. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, had built Martinez Medical Supply from nothing into Arizona's largest pharmaceutical distribution company. They deserved their success, or so I believed. My older sister Sarah had followed the expected path: law degree from ASU, marriage to Derek Williams, a slick investment banker who spoke in numbers and wore watches that could feed a family for months. She now worked as corporate counsel for the family business, living in Paradise Valley with her husband, managing legal affairs for what seemed like a legitimate empire. I was the black sheep who chose public service over profit margins. Every family gathering reinforced this dynamic. While Sarah discussed quarterly reports and expansion strategies, I talked about saving lives in ambulances. Their conversations revolved around golf club memberships and vacation homes in Sedona. Mine centered on overtime shifts and community health programs. The divide felt natural, even comfortable. I respected their business acumen, and they tolerated my idealistic career choice. The first crack in this carefully maintained family portrait appeared on a scorching July afternoon. I was restocking supplies at the station when my supervisor, Captain Rodriguez, pulled me aside with an expression I had never seen before. His weathered face, usually animated with dry humor, was set in stone. He handed me an official-looking envelope without a word, then walked away. Inside was a summons to appear in Maricopa County Superior Court. The plaintiff was Martinez Medical Supply, represented by Sarah Martinez Williams, Esquire. They were suing me for breach of fiduciary duty, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information. I read the document 3 times, each pass making less sense than the last. According to the filing, I had somehow gained unauthorized access to company databases, stolen confidential client information, and planned to sell trade secrets to competitors. The allegations were not just false, they were impossible. I had never worked for the company, never had access to their systems, never expressed any interest in the pharmaceutical business beyond my basic medical training. Yet here was legal documentation, signed and notarized, claiming I had betrayed a family trust that never existed. The confusion quickly transformed into something deeper and more unsettling. Why would my family fabricate such elaborate lies? What could they possibly gain from destroying my reputation and career? The lawsuit sought damages in excess of $2 million, far more than I would earn in a lifetime of emergency medical work. They were not just attacking me, they were attempting to obliterate any chance I had of financial recovery. That evening, I drove through the familiar streets of Scottsdale toward the family mansion, my hands gripping the steering wheel as questions multiplied in my mind. The security guard at their gated community waved me through with his usual friendly nod, unaware that I was no longer welcome in my childhood home. The circular driveway, lined with palm trees and desert landscaping that required more water than most neighborhoods used in a month, seemed foreign somehow. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. My father answered the door in his typical evening attire, pressed khakis, and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. His expression was not surprise or concern, but cold calculation. He had been expecting me. Behind him, I could see my mother in the living room, her perfectly styled hair catching the light from their crystal chandelier. Sarah sat beside her, still in her business suit, legal documents spread across the coffee table like battle plans. They were ready for war, and I was walking in unarmed and unprepared. The conversation that followed would shatter every assumption I had about love, loyalty, and family bonds. But more importantly, it would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a criminal enterprise hiding behind the facade of legitimate business success. I just did not know it yet. The living room felt like a courtroom as I walked in, with my family positioned as judge, jury, and executioner. The marble floors that had once echoed with childhood laughter now felt cold and unforgiving beneath my feet. My father gestured toward a single leather chair positioned directly across from where the three of them sat, a calculated arrangement that made me feel like a defendant facing interrogation. The silence stretched uncomfortably as I settled into the chair, the lawsuit documents still clutched in my hands like evidence of their betrayal. My mother spoke first, her voice carrying the same tone she had used when disciplining me as a child. However, there was something different now, something harder and more calculating that I had never heard before. She explained that they had discovered irregularities in their computer systems. Suspicious access attempts that traced back to someone with knowledge of family passwords and security protocols. The accusations flowed smoothly, as if rehearsed, painting a picture of a disgruntled son who had turned against his own family for financial gain. Sarah leaned forward, her lawyer persona fully activated, presenting printed emails and server logs that supposedly documented my criminal activities. The evidence looked professional and convincing, complete with timestamps and IP addresses that meant nothing to me but apparently proved my guilt beyond doubt. She spoke with the cold precision of someone presenting a case to a jury, her voice devoid of any sisterly affection or family warmth. According to her narrative, I had been planning this betrayal for months, using my access to the family home to plant monitoring devices and steal sensitive information. What struck me most was not the creativity of their lies, but the meticulous planning that had gone into constructing this elaborate deception. Every piece of evidence had been carefully crafted to support their story. Every timeline perfectly aligned with my work schedule and family visits. They had invested significant time and resources into building a case against me, which raised the obvious question of why. What could they possibly hope to accomplish by destroying their own son and brother? My father provided the answer with the casual indifference of someone discussing quarterly earnings. The lawsuit was not really about money or corporate espionage. It was about protecting the family reputation and business interests from what he termed my unstable behavior and poor judgment. According to his version of reality, my choice to work in emergency medical services had exposed me to dangerous elements and compromised my moral compass. He spoke about drug addicts and criminals I encountered daily, suggesting that prolonged exposure to society's darker elements had corrupted my values and made me susceptible to criminal influences. The narrative they constructed portrayed me as a fallen family member who could no longer be trusted with knowledge of their business operations or access to family resources. The lawsuit was designed to create legal distance between me and Martinez Medical Supply, protecting their company from any potential liability should my alleged criminal activities become public. They were not just cutting me out of the family, they were creating a paper trail that would absolve them of any responsibility for my actions. But underneath their carefully constructed explanation, I sensed something else: fear. Despite their confident presentation and overwhelming evidence, there was an undercurrent of anxiety that did not match the situation they described. If I were truly guilty of corporate espionage and theft, they should have been angry, not nervous. If their evidence was as solid as they claimed, they should have been satisfied with their legal position, not desperate to convince me of its validity. Their body language told a different story than their words. My mother kept glancing toward my father whenever I asked direct questions, as if seeking permission to respond. Sarah fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit I remembered from our childhood when she was hiding something from our parents. My father's responses seemed overly rehearsed, lacking the spontaneous anger I would have expected from someone whose business had been genuinely threatened by family betrayal. They were performing their outrage rather than feeling it. As the evening wore on, additional details emerged that deepened my confusion and suspicion. According to their timeline, my supposed criminal activities had begun approximately 6 months earlier, coinciding with a period when I had actually been working double shifts to cover for colleagues during a staffing shortage. The dates they cited for my alleged break-ins and computer access attempts matched nights when I had been pulling 24-hour shifts at the station, with dozens of witnesses and official documentation to prove my whereabouts. Sarah presented phone records showing suspicious calls between my number and unknown parties, but the timestamps corresponded to periods when I had been unconscious from exhaustion after particularly difficult emergency runs. Someone had clearly invested considerable effort into creating false evidence, but they had not been careful enough about verifying my actual schedule and activities. The inconsistencies were subtle but unmistakable once I began paying attention. My father then delivered what he clearly intended as the final blow. He explained that the family had made the difficult decision to pursue criminal charges in addition to the civil lawsuit. According to him, they had already been in contact with local law enforcement and federal authorities about my alleged crimes. The investigation was proceeding, and arrests were expected soon. He spoke with the grave satisfaction of someone delivering justice, but his eyes never quite met mine during this pronouncement. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Cooperate with their narrative. Accept responsibility for crimes I had not committed, and perhaps they would show mercy in their legal pursuit. Continue to deny the obvious evidence of my guilt, and face the full weight of both criminal prosecution and civil damages that would destroy any hope of financial recovery. They were offering me a choice between controlled destruction and complete annihilation. That night, I drove back to my apartment through the empty Phoenix streets, my mind racing through everything that had happened. The conversation had answered none of my questions, while creating dozens of new ones. Why would my family invest so much effort into destroying me? What were they so afraid of that required such extreme measures? Most importantly, what had I? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Stumbled onto that made them view me as such a significant threat? I spent hours reviewing my interactions with the family over the previous months, searching for some incident or discovery that might have triggered their paranoia. Had I seen something at the house that I was not supposed to see? Had I asked questions that made them uncomfortable? Had someone mistaken me for a genuine threat to their business operations? Nothing came to mind, but something was clearly wrong with this picture. The next morning brought a call from Tommy Chen, my former Army medic buddy who now worked in IT security for a major Phoenix hospital. His voice carried an urgency that immediately caught my attention. He had been monitoring local law enforcement communications as part of his security work when he noticed something unusual. Federal agents had been making inquiries about Martinez Medical Supply, asking questions that suggested an ongoing investigation into pharmaceutical distribution irregularities. According to Tommy's sources, the DEA had been building a case against several Arizona medical supply companies suspected of illegal prescription drug diversion. The investigation had been proceeding quietly for months, focusing on companies that showed suspicious patterns in their ordering and distribution records. Martinez Medical Supply was apparently one of several businesses under scrutiny, though no charges had been filed and no public announcements had been made. This information added an entirely new dimension to my family's behavior. Their sudden paranoia and desperate attempts to distance themselves from me made perfect sense if they were already under federal investigation. They were not afraid of what I might do. They were terrified of what I might already know. The lawsuit was not really about protecting their reputation from my alleged crimes. It was about creating a legal firewall between their business and any family member who might become a witness or whistleblower. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My family was not just successful, they were criminals. And somehow, they believed I posed a threat to their operation. Tommy's revelation about the federal investigation sent my mind reeling backward through years of family memories, searching for signs I had missed. Growing up in Phoenix, I had always accepted our family's sudden transformation from struggling middle class to wealthy elite as the natural result of hard work and business acumen. My father had started Martinez Medical Supply when I was 12, initially operating out of a small warehouse near Sky Harbor Airport. Within 5 years, we had moved from our modest Glendale home to the Scottsdale mansion, complete with housekeepers, gardeners, and luxury cars that seemed to multiply in our circular driveway. The transition had been so gradual that I never questioned its legitimacy. My parents explained their success through vague references to smart investments, exclusive contracts, and Robert's natural talent for identifying market opportunities. They spoke of pharmaceutical companies seeking reliable distributors, hospitals needing efficient supply chains, and medical practices requiring specialized products. The language was always professional and convincing, peppered with industry terminology that sounded legitimate to my adolescent ears. But now, examining those memories through the lens of federal investigation and criminal suspicion, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Our family vacations had always included stops in cities with major medical centers, trips my father characterized as business development opportunities. He would disappear for hours during these excursions, returning with briefcases full of documents and contracts that he claimed represented new partnerships and expanded territories. My mother would take Sarah and me shopping or sightseeing while he conducted these mysterious meetings. I remembered odd visitors at our home, men in expensive suits who spoke in hushed tones with my father in his study. They carried themselves with an authority that seemed inconsistent with typical pharmaceutical sales representatives, and their conversations often ended abruptly when family members appeared. My father would explain these encounters as negotiations with potential investors or consultations with industry specialists, but the atmosphere surrounding these meetings felt charged with tension rather than routine business discussion. Sarah had always been included in family business conversations from an early age, receiving detailed explanations about market strategies and operational procedures that went completely over my head. She showed genuine interest in the company's growth, asking intelligent questions about profit margins and regulatory compliance that impressed our parents and reinforced her position as the designated heir to the family empire. I preferred my paramedic training and emergency medical work, viewing their business discussions as tedious corporate minutiae. My exclusion from family business matters had seemed natural and mutual. I lacked Sarah's analytical mind and my father's entrepreneurial instincts, gravitating instead toward hands-on medical work that provided immediate gratification and clear moral purpose. They respected my career choice while making it clear that Martinez Medical Supply would remain Sarah's domain. The arrangement worked perfectly for everyone involved, or so I believed. Tommy's information about the DEA investigation forced me to reconsider this convenient narrative. Perhaps my exclusion from family business discussions had not been about protecting my sensitive nature or respecting my career preferences. Perhaps they had been protecting me from knowledge that could destroy my life, or more cynically, protecting themselves from a family member whose moral compass might conflict with their operational methods. The pharmaceutical distribution industry, I learned through quick research, was heavily regulated by federal agencies concerned about prescription drug diversion and illegal trafficking. Legitimate medical supply companies maintained detailed records of every transaction, tracked controlled substances through sophisticated monitoring systems, and submitted regular reports to regulatory authorities. The profit margins were substantial but carefully monitored, with severe penalties for companies that violated distribution protocols or failed to maintain proper documentation. However, the same infrastructure that supported legitimate pharmaceutical distribution could easily be exploited for illegal purposes. Companies with established relationships with hospitals, clinics, and medical practices could potentially divert prescription medications to black market dealers, bill insurance companies for non-existent services, or facilitate prescription fraud schemes. The financial incentives were enormous, and the regulatory oversight, while extensive, was not foolproof. My father's rapid accumulation of wealth suddenly appeared less impressive and more suspicious. Martinez Medical Supply had grown from startup to industry leader in less than a decade, achieving a level of success that typically required generations of careful development. Their client base included major hospitals throughout the Southwest, medical practices in underserved communities, and specialty clinics that treated chronic pain patients requiring controlled substances. The portfolio was diverse and lucrative, but it also provided numerous opportunities for illegal activities. I began examining my own inadvertent exposure to family business operations during my medical training and paramedic work. Phoenix's emergency medical system brought me into contact with hospitals, clinics, and medical practices throughout the metropolitan area. I had treated patients at facilities that I now realized were Martinez Medical Supply clients, though I had never made the connection at the time. My knowledge of medical procedures, pharmaceutical protocols, and hospital operations could potentially be valuable to someone planning illegal activities within the healthcare system. More troubling was the realization that my career had provided me with extensive knowledge of prescription drug abuse patterns, overdose symptoms, and street-level drug distribution networks. Working emergency calls in Phoenix's poorest neighborhoods had exposed me to the devastating effects of prescription drug addiction and the sophisticated networks that supplied illegal medications to desperate users. I understood how prescription drugs moved from legitimate medical sources to street dealers, and I knew which medications commanded the highest prices on the black market. This specialized knowledge, combined with my family connections and access to the Martinez household, could theoretically make me an ideal whistleblower or undercover informant for federal investigators. If the DEA suspected Martinez Medical Supply of illegal activities, they might view me as a potential asset for gathering inside information. My family's sudden paranoia and desperate attempts to discredit me suggested they had reached the same conclusion. The lawsuit began to make perfect sense as a preemptive strike designed to destroy my credibility before I could become a threat. By portraying me as a disgruntled family member with criminal tendencies and drug-related associations, they could undermine any testimony I might provide to federal investigators. The fabricated evidence of computer crimes and corporate espionage would make me appear unstable and vindictive, motivated by personal grievances rather than legitimate concerns about illegal activities. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, containing only an address and a time. No explanation, no signature, just coordinates that led to a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. The timing felt too coincidental to ignore, arriving just hours after my conversation with Tommy about federal investigations. Someone wanted to meet, and they were being deliberately vague about their identity and purpose. The paranoid part of my mind immediately suspected a trap. My family could be attempting to gather additional evidence of my supposed criminal activities by luring me to a meeting with unknown parties. They might have monitoring equipment or witnesses prepared to document whatever transpired at this mysterious encounter. Alternatively, genuine federal investigators might be reaching out through unofficial channels, seeking to establish contact without alerting potential subjects of their investigation. I decided to attend the meeting despite the obvious risks. My current situation could hardly become worse, and the potential benefits of learning more about the federal investigation outweighed the dangers of walking into a possible setup. If my family was monitoring my activities, they would discover this meeting regardless of my participation. If federal agents wanted to establish contact, ignoring their overture would eliminate a potentially valuable alliance. The coffee shop was located in a busy downtown district, providing sufficient foot traffic and ambient noise to mask conversations while offering multiple exit routes for anyone concerned about surveillance. I arrived early to observe the location and identify potential threats or monitoring equipment. The venue appeared legitimate, staffed by college students and frequented by office workers grabbing caffeine during their afternoon breaks. Nothing seemed suspicious or staged. A woman in her 40s approached my table at exactly the appointed time, carrying a briefcase and wearing the conservative business attire of a federal employee. She introduced herself as Agent Patricia Vasquez with the Drug Enforcement Administration, displaying credentials that appeared genuine, though I lacked the expertise to verify their authenticity. Her demeanor was professional but not unfriendly, suggesting someone experienced in recruiting civilian cooperation rather than conducting hostile interrogations. Agent Vasquez explained that the DEA had been investigating pharmaceutical distribution irregularities throughout Arizona for nearly 2 years, focusing on companies that showed suspicious patterns in their ordering and delivery records. Martinez Medical Supply had attracted attention due to discrepancies between their reported inventory levels and their actual pharmaceutical purchases, suggesting either massive inefficiency or systematic diversion of controlled substances. The investigation had reached a critical juncture where additional intelligence was needed to determine whether criminal charges were warranted. The DEA possessed financial records and shipping manifests that indicated potential illegal activities, but they lacked inside information about operational procedures and decision-making processes within the company. They needed someone with access to family discussions and business documents who could provide context for the suspicious patterns they had identified. Agent Vasquez made it clear that my cooperation was entirely voluntary, and no formal agreement was being proposed at this initial meeting. However, she also mentioned that federal investigators were aware of the civil lawsuit filed against me by Martinez Medical Supply, and they found the timing of this legal action quite interesting given their ongoing investigation. She suggested that my family might be attempting to discredit me before I could provide information to federal authorities. The meeting concluded with Agent Vasquez providing me with a secure communication method and encouraging me to consider the broader implications of my family's business activities. She emphasized that prescription drug diversion was not a victimless crime, pointing to the overdose deaths and addiction crises that resulted from illegal pharmaceutical distribution. The conversation ended with a simple request: think about what I knew and consider whether justice required action on my part. Walking back to my car through the Phoenix heat, I realized that my family crisis had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple inheritance dispute. The secure communication device Agent Vasquez had given me felt heavier than its actual weight as I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at it like a loaded weapon. The small encrypted phone represented a crossroads between family loyalty and moral obligation, between the comfortable lies I had believed my entire life and the harsh truths that were beginning to emerge. Making the call would irrevocably change everything, transforming me from a passive victim of family betrayal into an active participant in their potential destruction. Sleep proved impossible that night as my mind churned through decades of memories, searching for evidence that might support the DEA's suspicions about Martinez Medical Supply. The fragments that emerged painted a disturbing picture of a family business built on foundations I had never questioned. I remembered pharmaceutical delivery trucks arriving at odd hours, their drivers speaking in hushed tones with my father before disappearing into the warehouse sections of our property that were always kept locked and off-limits to family members. The mansion itself contained architectural features that had never made sense from a residential perspective. The basement included several rooms with reinforced security doors and climate control systems that my father claimed were necessary for storing sensitive business documents. The garage could accommodate far more vehicles than our family owned, with loading dock features that seemed excessive for personal use. Even the landscaping included privacy barriers and surveillance equipment that went well beyond typical security measures for wealthy neighborhoods. During my teenage years, I had occasionally helped with minor tasks around the warehouse facilities, mostly loading and organizing supplies that appeared perfectly legitimate. Medical devices, bandages, basic pharmaceuticals, and equipment destined for hospitals and clinics throughout Arizona. However, certain areas remained strictly forbidden, supposedly containing highly regulated materials that required special handling, procedures, and federal oversight. My father explained these restrictions as standard industry practices designed to protect both the company and our family from liability issues. Sarah had always enjoyed greater access to business operations, spending summers working in the administrative offices and accompanying our parents to industry conferences and client meetings. She understood the regulatory environment, maintained relationships with key customers, and gradually assumed responsibility for legal compliance and documentation procedures. Her law degree had been specifically chosen to support the family business, focusing on healthcare regulation and pharmaceutical law, rather than the general corporate practice that might have offered broader career opportunities. The division of labor within our family structure suddenly appeared more calculated than natural. Sarah's legal expertise provided protection against regulatory scrutiny and potential criminal liability. My medical background offered technical knowledge about pharmaceutical products and healthcare delivery systems. Our mother managed community relationships and social connections that enhanced the company's reputation and provided political protection. My father maintained operational control and strategic planning, while keeping the most sensitive activities hidden from family members who might object to illegal practices. My exclusion from certain business discussions had not been about protecting my idealistic nature or respecting my career preferences. It had been about maintaining plausible deniability and ensuring that at least one family member remained untainted by knowledge of criminal activities. If federal investigations ever threatened the company, I could serve as a character witness who genuinely believed in the family's innocence and legitimacy. My ignorance had been carefully cultivated and strategically maintained. The lawsuit against me represented a shift in this protective strategy, suggesting that my ignorance was no longer sufficient to shield me from potential consequences. Perhaps the federal investigation had progressed to a point where my medical expertise and family connections made me too valuable as a potential witness to ignore. Perhaps they feared that my work in emergency medical services had exposed me to information that could support criminal charges against them. Whatever their reasoning, they had decided that destroying my credibility was more important than maintaining my loyalty. Agent Vasquez had left me with detailed information about prescription drug diversion schemes and their impact on communities throughout Arizona. The statistics were staggering. Thousands of deaths from prescription overdoses, addiction rates that devastated entire neighborhoods, and criminal networks that generated billions in illegal profits while destroying countless lives. Legitimate medical supply companies that participated in these schemes faced federal charges that routinely resulted in decades-long prison sentences and financial penalties that bankrupt entire family fortunes. The human cost of prescription drug diversion extended far beyond the obvious victims who overdosed or became addicted to illegally obtained medications. Healthcare systems struggled with increased costs and reduced access to legitimate treatments. Insurance companies raised premiums to offset fraudulent claims. Medical professionals faced professional sanctions and criminal liability for their unwitting participation in illegal distribution schemes. Law enforcement resources were diverted from other public safety priorities to combat prescription drug trafficking networks. My own experiences as a paramedic had brought me face to face with these consequences on a daily basis. I had treated overdose victims who had obtained prescription medications through illegal channels, often paying exorbitant prices for drugs that should have been available through legitimate medical care. I had witnessed families destroyed by prescription drug addiction, children neglected while parents pursued their next fix, and elderly patients who rationed essential medications because they could not afford legitimate prescriptions. The possibility that my family's wealth and success had been built on contributing to these tragedies created a moral crisis that went far beyond personal betrayal. If Martinez Medical Supply was indeed involved in prescription drug diversion, then every luxury in my childhood home had been purchased with money that represented someone else's suffering. Every family vacation, every expensive education, every comfortable advantage I had enjoyed was potentially funded by activities that destroyed other families and communities. Tommy called late that evening with additional intelligence about the federal investigation, his voice tight with concern and urgency. His contacts in law enforcement had provided more specific details about the DEA's case against Martinez Medical Supply, information that painted an even more troubling picture of the company's operations. The investigation had identified significant discrepancies in controlled substance inventories, suggesting systematic diversion of prescription medications to illegal distribution networks. According to Tommy's sources, the DEA had documentation showing that Martinez Medical Supply routinely ordered quantities of controlled substances that far exceeded the legitimate needs of their declared customer base. Hospitals and clinics served by the company were reporting shortages of essential medications, while the company's purchase records indicated massive quantities of the same drugs. The mathematical impossibility of these discrepancies suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate criminal activity. More damaging was evidence that the company had established relationships with medical practices in rural areas and underserved communities, locations that provided minimal oversight and maximum opportunities for prescription fraud. These practices were prescribing controlled substances at rates far above national averages, often to patients who traveled significant distances for treatment and paid cash for services. The prescription pattern suggested pill mill operations designed to generate fraudulent prescriptions for medications that would be diverted to illegal distribution networks. The DEA had also identified financial transactions between Martinez Medical Supply and shell companies with no apparent legitimate business purpose. Money was flowing through complex networks of corporate entities, offshore accounts, and real estate investments that obscured the true sources and destinations of pharmaceutical profits. The financial architecture was sophisticated enough to suggest professional money laundering services and long-term criminal planning, rather than opportunistic fraud. Tommy's most disturbing revelation concerned the timeline of the federal investigation. The DEA had been building their case for nearly 3 years, far longer than Agent Vasquez had indicated during our meeting. This suggested that the investigation was approaching its conclusion, with criminal charges likely to be filed within months rather than years. The timing of my family's lawsuit suddenly appeared even more calculated, representing a last-minute attempt to discredit me before federal prosecutors made their case public. The encrypted phone felt like a burning coal in my hands as I considered my options. Cooperating with the DEA would provide them with insider information that could strengthen their case and potentially reduce the sentences faced by my family members. However, it would also transform me into a federal informant, forever altering my relationship with everyone I had ever known and trusted. The emotional cost of betraying my family, regardless of their crimes, would be enormous and permanent. Refusing to cooperate would leave me vulnerable to both criminal prosecution and civil liability, while providing no protection for my family. If the DEA already possessed sufficient evidence to proceed with charges, my silence would not save my parents and sister from federal prosecution. It would simply ensure that I face the consequences of their actions without having done anything to minimize the damage or protect innocent parties who might be affected by their crimes. The moral calculus was clear, even if the emotional reality remained overwhelming. My family's criminal activities, if proven, had contributed to addiction, overdose deaths, and community destruction throughout Arizona. My cooperation with federal investigators could help ensure that justice was served and that their illegal operations were permanently shut down. The personal cost of this cooperation was significant, but the public benefit was immeasurable. I picked up the encrypted phone and dialed Agent Vasquez's number, my hands steady despite the magnitude of the decision I was making. The call connected after 2 rings, and her voice carried the professional calm of someone who had been expecting my contact. I spoke 3 words that would forever change the trajectory of my life and my family's future. I'm ready to help. The meeting with Agent Vasquez took place the following morning in a nondescript office building near downtown Phoenix, the kind of generic corporate space that could house anything from insurance companies to consulting firms. She had arranged for a conference room equipped with recording equipment and legal documentation, transforming what had begun as an informal conversation into an official federal cooperation agreement. The gravity of the situation crystallized as I reviewed the witness protection protocols and immunity provisions that would govern my involvement in their investigation. Agent Vasquez introduced me to her team, including Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez, a financial crimes specialist who had been tracking money laundering operations throughout the Southwest, and Agent Jennifer Walsh, whose expertise in pharmaceutical law provided the technical foundation for their case against Martinez Medical Supply. The 3 agents had been working together for over 2 years, building a comprehensive understanding of prescription drug diversion networks that operated across state lines and generated hundreds of millions in illegal profits annually. The scope of their investigation extended far beyond my family's company, encompassing a network of medical supply distributors, pain management clinics, and corrupt healthcare providers that formed a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Martinez Medical Supply occupied a central position in this network, serving as a primary distribution hub for controlled substances that were diverted from legitimate medical channels into illegal markets. The evidence they had compiled painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that had been operating for nearly a decade. Agent Rodriguez presented financial records that documented the flow of money through Martinez Medical Supply and its affiliated companies, revealing a complex web of transactions designed to obscure the true sources and destinations of pharmaceutical profits. Bank accounts in multiple states received regular transfers from medical practices that were prescribing controlled substances at rates far exceeding national averages. These funds were then distributed through shell companies and offshore accounts before being invested in legitimate businesses and real estate holdings that provided a veneer of respectability. The financial analysis revealed that Martinez Medical Supply had generated over $50 million in revenue during the previous fiscal year, profits that were mathematically impossible based on their declared customer base and legitimate pharmaceutical distribution margins. The company's reported inventory turnover rates suggested they were moving controlled substances at volumes that exceeded the combined prescribing capacity of all their registered clients. The discrepancies were so significant that they indicated either massive fraud or complete regulatory breakdown. Agent Walsh shared surveillance footage and recorded conversations that provided context for the financial evidence, showing meetings between my father and individuals who had been identified as key figures in prescription drug trafficking organizations. The recordings captured discussions about pricing structures, delivery schedules, and payment methods that were inconsistent with legitimate pharmaceutical distribution practices. References to special orders and cash customers suggested systematic diversion of controlled substances to illegal markets. The surveillance evidence also documented my sister Sarah's involvement in the criminal enterprise, showing her participation in meetings with corrupt healthcare providers and her role in structuring legal agreements that facilitated prescription fraud. Her law degree and professional credentials had been used to create contracts and corporate structures that provided legal cover for illegal activities. She had knowingly drafted documentation that enabled prescription drug diversion while maintaining plausible deniability for the company's senior management. My mother's role appeared to focus on community relations and political connections that protected the family business from regulatory scrutiny. She had cultivated relationships with local officials, healthcare administrators, and community leaders that provided early warning about potential investigations and influence over regulatory decisions. Her charitable activities and social connections had created a network of allies who were willing to vouch for the family's reputation and legitimacy without understanding the true nature of their business operations. The agents explained that my cooperation would involve providing insider information about family discussions, business procedures, and operational details that could corroborate their existing evidence. They needed testimony about conversations I had witnessed, documents I had seen, and activities I had observed that would establish the criminal intent and knowledge required for successful prosecution. My medical background would also be valuable in explaining the technical aspects of prescription drug diversion to juries and judges who lacked healthcare expertise. Agent Vasquez emphasized that my cooperation agreement included substantial protections, including immunity from prosecution for any crimes I might have unknowingly facilitated through my family connections. The federal government recognized that I had been deliberately excluded from knowledge of illegal activities and had never received financial benefits from criminal operations. My cooperation was viewed as civic duty rather than criminal collaboration, and I would be protected from retaliation through witness security protocols. The recording equipment captured hours of detailed testimony about my observations of family business activities, conversations I had overheard, and suspicious patterns I had noticed but never understood. I described the unusual security measures at our family home, the restricted access to certain areas of the warehouse facilities, and the odd hours when pharmaceutical deliveries occurred. I recounted conversations between my father and unidentified visitors who spoke in coded language about quantities, schedules, and payment arrangements. My medical training allowed me to provide technical context for the prescription fraud schemes the DEA had identified, explaining how controlled substances were diverted from legitimate medical channels and distributed through illegal networks. I described the symptoms of prescription drug addiction I had observed while working as a paramedic, the overdose patterns that suggested systematic availability of illegally obtained medications, and the community impact of prescription drug trafficking that I had witnessed firsthand in Phoenix's poorest neighborhoods. The agents were particularly interested in my knowledge of specific medical practices and healthcare providers that were clients of Martinez Medical Supply, asking detailed questions about their prescribing patterns, patient demographics, and operational procedures. My emergency medical work had brought me into contact with several facilities that were apparently involved in the prescription fraud network, providing first-hand observations about their suspicious activities and irregular practices. Agent Rodriguez questioned me extensively about financial arrangements I had observed within the family, including cash transactions, unusual banking procedures, and investment decisions that seemed inconsistent with legitimate pharmaceutical distribution profits. I described my father's collection of expensive assets that appeared suddenly without corresponding business justification, including luxury vehicles, real estate holdings, and art collections that suggested income sources beyond declared pharmaceutical revenues. The interview process continued for several days, with agents methodically documenting every detail of my testimony and cross-referencing my statements with their existing evidence. They showed me photographs of individuals I was asked to identify, played recordings of conversations for context verification, and presented financial documents for my interpretation and analysis. The thoroughness of their preparation was impressive and somewhat intimidating, suggesting they had been building this case with meticulous attention to detail. As the cooperation process progressed, I learned that federal prosecutors were preparing indictments against multiple defendants, including not only my family members, but also corrupt healthcare providers, money laundering specialists, and organized crime figures who had facilitated the prescription drug diversion network. The scope of the criminal enterprise was larger than I had imagined, involving hundreds of participants and generating billions in illegal profits over nearly a decade of operation. The emotional toll of providing testimony against my family was overwhelming, requiring frequent breaks and psychological support from victim advocates who specialized in family crime situations. The agents were professionally sympathetic but clear about the necessity of my cooperation for achieving justice for the communities that had been harmed by prescription drug diversion. They shared statistics about overdose deaths, addiction rates, and healthcare costs that had resulted from the criminal network my family had helped to operate. My testimony concluded with a detailed timeline of family activities during the months leading up to the lawsuit against me, providing federal investigators with insights into the defensive strategies that Martinez Medical Supply had employed once they became aware of the investigation. The timing of their legal action against me, the fabrication of evidence suggesting my criminal activity, and their attempts to isolate me from family business discussions all supported the prosecution's theory that they had knowledge of their criminal liability and were attempting to obstruct justice. Agent Vasquez informed me that federal prosecutors expected to file indictments within weeks, followed by coordinated arrests and asset seizures that would effectively shut down the entire prescription drug diversion network. My family would be among the primary defendants, facing charges that could result in decades of federal prison time and forfeiture of all assets connected to their criminal activities. The mansion, the business, the investments, and even personal property purchased with illegal profits would be subject to federal confiscation. The witness protection protocols would become active once the indictments were unsealed, providing me with a new identity and relocation assistance that would ensure my safety from potential retaliation. The federal government recognized that cooperation in organized crime cases carried significant personal risks, and they had extensive experience protecting witnesses who testified against family members and criminal associates. My cooperation agreement included financial support for establishing a new life in a different location under a different name. The final phase of my cooperation involved reviewing the testimony I had provided and signing legal documents that formalized my agreement to testify in criminal proceedings. The agents explained courtroom procedures, cross-examination strategies that defense attorneys would likely employ, and security measures that would be implemented during trial proceedings. They emphasized that my testimony was crucial for establishing the criminal intent and knowledge required for successful prosecution of the case. 3 weeks after my final interview with federal agents, the indictments were unsealed in a coordinated law enforcement action that made national news. DEA agents executed search warrants at dozens of locations throughout Arizona, including the Martinez Medical Supply warehouses, my family's Scottsdale mansion, and the offices of corrupt healthcare providers who had participated in the prescription drug diversion network. The simultaneous raids resulted in 37 arrests and the seizure of assets worth over $200 million. My parents, sister, and brother-in-law were arrested at their respective homes in coordinated operations that ensured none of them had opportunities to destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction. The charges against them included conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, healthcare fraud, and racketeering violations that carried potential sentences of life imprisonment. The federal government had built an overwhelming case that would be difficult for any defense attorney to challenge successfully. The local news coverage was extensive and devastating to the family's reputation, with reporters describing the luxurious lifestyle that had been funded by prescription drug trafficking and the community impact of their criminal activities. Interviews with addiction counselors, overdose survivors, and family members of victims provided human context for the abstract charges and financial figures. The Martinez family name became synonymous with corporate crime and community betrayal. From my protected location in another state, I watched the coverage with complex emotions that ranged from satisfaction at seeing justice served to profound grief for the family relationships that had been forever destroyed. The people I had loved and trusted had built their success on activities that caused immeasurable suffering, and my cooperation with federal investigators had been necessary to stop their criminal operations. The personal cost was enormous, but the moral imperative had been clear. The trial proceedings lasted 8 months, with my testimony serving as a crucial component of the prosecution's case against the prescription drug diversion network. Defense attorneys attempted to portray me as a disgruntled family member seeking revenge, but the physical evidence and financial records corroborated every aspect of my testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges against all defendants. My father received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison, effectively ensuring he would die behind bars. My mother was sentenced to 15 years for her role in money laundering and obstruction of justice. Sarah received 18 years for her legal facilitation of the criminal enterprise, with additional professional sanctions that permanently barred her from practicing law. Derek was sentenced to 12 years for his financial management of illegal profits through investment schemes and offshore accounts. The civil lawsuit they had filed against me was dismissed with prejudice once their criminal convictions became final, and federal prosecutors filed countersuits to recover the legal fees and damages they had attempted to extract from me through fabricated evidence. The irony was complete. Their attempt to destroy my credibility had provided federal investigators with additional evidence of consciousness of guilt and obstruction of justice. The Witness Protection Program provided me with a new identity and career opportunities in emergency medical services in a different state, allowing me to rebuild my life while maintaining the professional purpose that had always defined my identity. The psychological counseling and support services helped me process the trauma of family betrayal and the complex emotions associated with choosing justice over loyalty. The decision to cooperate with federal investigators had been morally correct, but the personal consequences would last forever. Years later, I learned that the prescription drug diversion network we had dismantled had been responsible for hundreds of overdose deaths and thousands of addiction cases throughout the Southwest. The criminal enterprise had generated over $3 billion in illegal profits during its decade of operation, money that had been extracted from communities already struggling with poverty, limited healthcare access, and substance abuse problems. My cooperation with federal investigators had helped to achieve justice for victims who would never be able to speak for themselves. The single document that had triggered the DEA raid was my signed cooperation agreement, a piece of paper that represented my commitment to truth over family loyalty, justice over personal comfort, and moral courage over convenient silence. That document had transformed me from a victim of family betrayal into an instrument of federal justice, forever changing the trajectory of my life and the lives of everyone I had ever loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.